Hi, I'm George from F1 Reverse, and this is Don't At Me, the show where we get a chance to voice our opinions on the news we bring you every day. Today, I'm going to be talking about the shocking decline of the Mercedes Formula 1 team since 2021, that big Ferrari move, and what Lewis might do when he gets there. So, don't go anywhere. So, Mercedes, let's call them the elephant in the room at the moment. They are a team in decline. You just have to look at their results to know that. It's just a fact. They have been going backwards. It's easy to say that it started with the changing regulations and the ground effect era, but there's more to it than that. The ground effect regulations have definitely made it get worse, but I think it started before then. In 2021, Mercedes were caught by Red Bull. You can call it the Human Error Championship or whatever else you want to say, but Mercedes were the clear favourites going into that season. I mean, no one would have bet against them. They were favourites. They beat Red Bull by over 200 points in the Constructors' Championship in 2020, and Lewis beat Max by 133 points. Red Bull shouldn't have been able to close that gap, especially with 2022 just on the horizon, and teams kind of switching their plans over to that, and 2021 it was like a lacking of upgrade season when everyone was looking at the new regulations. Mercedes had used their incredible split-turbo engine to great effect from 2024 onwards. Everyone knew that they had a big power advantage, but then in 2021, Honda made some big changes to the Red Bull engine. They gained them around 30 horsepower, which put them on a level with Mercedes, and all of a sudden, Mercedes and Red Bull were now similar power, so Mercedes lost that advantage. There was Red Bull's new rear suspension, which came in 2021. Adrian Newey got it really wrong in 2020. They went away very early in 2020 and kind of said, let's work this out. In 2021 it came. Then there was the regulation changes, which is what everyone likes to point out. They say, the FIA hamstrung Mercedes. So they changed the rules for the floor of the cars, and there was some other stuff towards the back end of the floor as well, and they changed how everything had to look. People always say it was targeted at Mercedes, but at preseason testing, Mercedes' Andrew Chauvelin said, when he was asked who it was going to impact the most, those changes, he said, "That is the million-dollar question. Absolutely no one knows." Now, Lewis would later say, I think at the end of that testing actually, that they were targeted, that the FIA were like, we need to hamstrung Mercedes. These regulation changes will do that. But going into the season, no one knew if it would affect the high rake or the low rake cars more. It just so happens, it turns out it was Mercedes who got affected, not Red Bull. But those changes were made for safety purposes, not to target Mercedes. So, on top of all of that, Mercedes were cocky that season as well. They switched development to their 2020 car really early, which Red Bull didn't do. They kind of focused on 2021 more, obviously realizing there was a chance they could win a title. Mercedes, though, they just assumed they had enough pace in the bank. They'd been so dominant for those previous 7 years, winning every single championship title, drivers and constructors. But then, they were just cocky and just thought they had enough in the bank, and they changed their development over and said, screw it, it doesn't matter. So that cockiness and the oversight of the regulation changes, I think, was the start of the decline. So you're talking mid-2020, these decisions were probably made. And I think those decisions, that cockiness, that oversight, you're still seeing effect. It was repeated, that cockiness, in pre-season 2022, when Merc didn't fit their zero pods in Barcelona, because they were trying to hide them from everyone, because they were worried that they were going to be really, really good, and if they showed everyone them too early, then everyone would start turning up with this zero pod design. The problem then was that they completely wasted 3 days of testing. You're at the track, you've got Lewis and George doing laps in this car that you're just not going to run. That's so much data, I still can't get my head around how they thought that was a good idea. It's half of their preseason testing that they've just been like, oh no, it just doesn't matter, we're not going to test anything, we'll run the engine through some benchmarks and we'll change the wings around and see which ones we like. But the overall aerostructure of the car was so different to the car that then turned up at Bahrain for the second test. It's wild. It still baffles me. But yeah, so they wasted those 3 days. And that self-assurance was compounded by the Mercedes team simulator. So Mercedes were really sure of themselves. They were like, yeah, this car's going to be great. We'll turn up 2022. We'll not even do half the testing. We'll turn up for the second one and it's going to be great. Because they had their simulator and they were like, oh yeah, the simulator's really good. It's, the data's looking good. But the problem is that the Mercedes simulator either doesn't get used or just isn't very good. Lewis said back in 2021, I hardly ever drive on the simulator. I maybe do 20 laps a year, maybe. I have no interest in the simulator. He then gave this huge list of reasons of why he doesn't like using it. But that's just insane. There's so little testing, you're not going to turn up with the correct car for 3 days of the testing, and then you've got your best driver, your 7-time World Championship winning driver, just not using the simulator. And I mean, to be fair, the simulator doesn't match up to the real world anyway, but it's just cockiness, and it's assuredness, and they're like, yeah, no, we're going to be fine. We've got this. We know what we're doing. So that doesn't work. The sim doesn't match up. Lewis hasn't been using it anyway. So Toto then is complaining about all the data from the sim not matching the real world, and he's been doing that since 2022. They said the W13 was going to be a second quicker than it actually was, and they were so sure of themselves as well. For do you remember 2022? So much of that season, they were so sure, and Toto was like, yep, it's going to be great. There's an extra second in this car. We just have to find the good stuff, I think were his words over and over again. That's a problem. Simulators are so important in F1 now. The teams have so little testing time, and building upgrades is so expensive that the upgrades that you do have, they need to work, and they need to work quickly. But Mercedes are not testing their upgrades properly, and even when they do, they don't match up to the track. And that's where this downward slope is coming from, is that something that's happening in the simulator and whatever's happening at the factory just isn't matching up to the real world. And it's still a problem now. Toto said after the Saudi Grand Prix this year, our simulations point us in a direction, and this is the kind of setup range that we then choose. It's a more fundamental thing that we believe the speed should be there, and we measure the downforce, but we don't find it on the lap time. So yeah, the simulator's still a problem, and it's a massive problem as well. So you've got the sim problem, you've got the overconfidence issues, and then there's the brain drain as well. So a brain drain in Formula 1 is when you've got all your staff and they're going elsewhere, and it's all this experience, all this knowledge is just being gone from the team. So before the budget cap came in, Mercedes were the highest spending F1 team on the grid. They spent $500 million a year. That's a lot of money, and they obviously had to cut that back in a big way. Part of that was not raising wages and also laying staff off as well. Mercedes were the biggest hit with that. They laid off hundreds of members of staff, which was terrible for everyone who had to be laid off. But without the budget cap coming in, the sport just financially wouldn't have worked anymore. It was already getting to dire straits, and then we got hit by COVID. So Mercedes have had to lay off these staff. They can't give them pay rises either. And then you get teams coming in and saying, oh, well, we've got some spare money. We'll give you a pay rise. We can give you promotions. Red Bull powertrains started, an hour away from the Mercedes factory. They're not that far away from each other. They came in, they poached loads of staff from Mercedes. The Mercedes HPP head of mechanical engineering, Ben Hodgkinson, as well as a load of other engine people underneath him, moved to Red Bull as soon as the Red Bull powertrain started up, because Red Bull could offer them more money, basically. So there you had literally hundreds of years of F1 experience leaving the Mercedes powertrain department. That's a problem. That's experience and knowledge you cannot replace with money or anything else. You've got to wait for your staff to gain that same information. Aston Martin came and took Mercedes chief aerodynamicist, Eric Blandin. That was 2022. You got James Vowles. He's a massive part of the Mercedes team. He goes to Williams. And I know Mike Elliott obviously got a lot of flack for the zero pod and the carrying on of the zero pod, but they just let him go. He's still an incredibly experienced and clever guy, and they used him as a scapegoat and got rid of him, and that's just added to this brain drain where Mercedes have lost a huge number of high-level staff, and they've done not a lot to fix that problem. So yeah, the impact of all of this, you've got the cockiness, you've got the simulator not working, and you've got all these staff leaving. And the team just can't work out how to get the ground effect car to work consistently. They've lost all this brain power, which might be able to solve the problem. The simulator just doesn't seem to work, which might help them solve the problem. And they're starting like years late because they were so sure of themselves that the design they had would actually work and that what they were seeing on track was just wrong. It's like there's just no way back for them now. And the consequence of that is that they are 244 points behind Red Bull in 2022, 451 points in 2023, and this season it looks even worse. I really think that there's a world where they finish behind both their customer teams, McLaren and Aston Martin. And that's not good. Like, that's really embarrassing. And I think it's probably the first time that's ever happened in Formula 1, where you've got a full works team losing to two customer teams. Okay, maybe not old Formula 1, but certainly modern Formula 1, turn of the millennium. These teams, the works outfits, are meant to be so much better than the customer outfits, and Mercedes have just got these regulations wrong. But the biggest problem is that they've got all these problems, and they just don't know how to fix them. Like, the brand new car, the 2024 car, looks worse than last year's compared to the grid. It probably does put a faster lap time in, but compared to everyone else, they've found less time. They need to sort themselves out because 2026 is new regulations, and if they can't get their simulator working properly, if they can't work out the ground effect, it's going to be bad again. And all this work they've done to try and work out the current regulations is going to go out the window, and they're going to have to start again. And we're going to probably, well, I don't say probably, that's probably a bit mean. They might have another zero pod situation where they, all their simulator data, and they think, oh yeah, great, we're going to turn up and we're going to have a good car, and that just doesn't happen. So then we come to Lewis Hamilton. Mercedes are a team in decline. The points say that. The facts are they are doing worse year on year at the moment. Lewis can see this. The guy's not an idiot. He knows that something's wrong at the team and that things are going badly. So he leaves and signs for Ferrari. He had this 1 year plus 1 year deal with Mercedes, the first year being this year, 2024. The second year was meant to be 2025, but it was an extension. They could break it in the middle if they wanted to. Mercedes gave him that contract because they didn't want to get signed in for too long because they knew they had some good young drivers coming through. And, Lewis has just made the most of it and said, well, you're doing terrible. I'm going to go to Ferrari. They've given me the option. It's a fantastic move for Lewis. He's going to get more sponsors because he's now at Ferrari. He's getting more money because of his new contract and his new sponsors. And he gets away from the declining Mercedes team. And from the looks of it, he's going to step into a Ferrari team who realistically could give him a chance of getting that record-breaking 8th world title. They look really good this season, and I know Max obviously retired in Australia, and it's a bit iffy as to what was wrong with Perez. They said there was a visor tear-off underneath his floor. I'm not sure how much of a difference that really makes. He didn't look that fast compared to Ferrari and McLaren. But I don't know, a visor tear-off, a tenth a second a lap? That seems like a lot to me. But there we go. So yeah, Lewis is making this move. He could win the 8th title, and that really puts him in first place in the conversation about best driver ever. World record titles. He will have won it with 3 teams. He'd only be the second driver ever to do that. Fangio was the first one, and that was way back when the sport was still brand new. Yeah, great move for Lewis. And for Ferrari, it's great as well. There are already reports that sponsors are looking to leave Merck because Lewis is their main man. So Ferrari get more sponsors, which is more money, more profit for the team. You then get Lewis, who is so commercially valuable, and he's just going to help them sell so many more cars, which at the end of the day is what Ferrari are in Formula 1 to do. Well, obviously, they're in it to race and win, but it's an advertising board for them to sell cars, and Lewis is going to do that. So, everyone wins, apart from Mercedes, who are going to carry on losing. I've seen loads of stuff saying that, Lewis is washed up and he's finished. I just think he's fed up, though, of being ignored and losing at Mercedes, and I think Ferrari will be a fresh challenge, and it'll bring the best out of him again. And I think, I don't know, Charles Leclerc's a good driver. and I'm not a Team LH44 fan. I'm not on Twitter calling people names and stuff, whatever else, but I do think that Lewis will be reinvigorated with the move to Ferrari. Alright, that's my opinion on the downfall of Mercedes and the massive upcoming Hamilton to Ferrari move. This was Don't At Me. I was George, this was F1 Reverse, and I look forward to seeing you next time.